I have a question. When you put your pieces together to sew, do you line them up at the edge of the fabric or the seam line? Hello, and welcome to another episode of Things You May Not Know. Let's talk about seam allowance. When you sew two pieces together, an extra bit of fabric is needed to allow a seam to be sewn. The width of seam allowance can vary greatly depending on personal preference, seam type, or the fabric being used. Always double check your pattern to make sure you're using the correct measurement. Now going back to my question at the beginning, did you know you should always line up your pieces at the seam line? Allow me to show you why. Here I've prepared 3 squares all cut in different ways. A straight cut, a diagonal, and a curve. Where the squares have been cut will be our seam line. See how our seams all match up perfectly? That's because each side of the cut edge is the same length. Now let's add some seam allowance to our seams. Now that our pieces have seam allowance, you'll notice they really don't look all that different. Let's see what happens when we put them right sides together like you would if you were sewing the seam. Beginning with our straight cut, if you put them together, you'll notice the edges match up, your seam lines match up, and there shouldn't be any overhang on either side. Now let's look at our diagonal. If I were to line these up at the edges of the pattern piece instead of the seam line, you'll notice part of our seam is exposed. But if I slide these down to where the seam lines meet at the top and the bottom, it fits perfectly. Now you may have a little overhang at the top or the bottom, but that's perfectly fine. All you need to worry about is that that seam goes all the way across. Now let's look at our curve. This one's a little trickier to do in paper, but if I take these top edges and align them there, this doesn't match. If I slide this up so that the seam lines match, you do get a little bit of overhang, but if you walk this seam down, it's going to fit perfectly. Now I'm sure there's a mathematical explanation for why this discrepancy happens, but it's probably geometric, and geometry was my least favorite type of math in school, so I have no idea. What I do know is that the length of the seam line doesn't change. This is why it's so important when you're pinning your pieces together that you're matching at the seam line, not the fabric edge. So next time you're struggling to get a princess seam to line up, ask yourself, am I matching my pieces at the seam line or the cut edge of the fabric? And now you know. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more, be sure to give me a follow. If you have any questions or can think of any topics you'd like me to cover, please leave me a comment or send me a DM. Goodbye. Guys, look at these earrings. Are they beautiful? My gorgeous, talented friend Bonnie made them. You should go check out her shop. Okay, bye.